Hello, this is Robert Rickover. I'm an Alexander Technique teacher in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I teach in Toronto. My guest today is Arielle Weiss, who is an Alexander teacher in Philadelphia, outside of Philadelphia, and she's been teaching for about 32 years. And we're going to talk today about online teaching. The reason I set up this interview with Arielle is that she recently taught like a couple of hundred people in an online series of classes, and I thought it was kind of interesting how she managed that. And I think for teachers who are thinking about doing some group teaching online, she would have some good suggestions. But Arielle, I'd like to start with just your experience initially, I assume, with one-on-one online teaching. And what have you found doing that might be helpful information for other teachers?
Sure. First of all, thank you, Robert, for your continued leadership in our community of doing things like this. So thank you so much for the opportunity. Um, so I started teaching some online lessons several years ago, mostly with students I already knew that had moved away. And so that's a very different scenario because I already was somewhat familiar with them as people and movers and had used my hands to also gather information. And they also knew my teaching. And so we already had a bit of a shared vocabulary and shared experience. I had a couple of students that I connected with online that I hadn't met in person, but usually ended up referring them to in-person lessons.
Mm-hmm.
So when COVID pandemic hit and we all needed to stay at home, I immediately pivoted and started offering 7 classes a week online. And I did that because I didn't want to leave my students stranded, literally. And also, selfishly, I'm a person that does much better when I'm engaged. And I don't know what I would be doing if I wasn't teaching right now. So I kind of very quickly converted the group classes I already was teaching to online teaching, and also isolated out different communities that I teach and offered classes specifically targeted to communities of actors and musicians and seniors, in addition to my more generally focused classes. Did I answer your question yet?
Yeah. So you um, you didn't have a lot of experience with one-on-one teaching with people you'd never met before. Okay.
No.
Um, so you kind of jumped right into groups, but I assume relatively small groups.
Right. So my online group classes have ranged in size from 2 people to about 15. And then when I was approached by Friends Life Care, this is a Quaker organization in the Philadelphia area, services seniors with a wide array of programs. And they had reached out to me last year. I was supposed to do an in-person presentation for them. And I've been teaching seniors for a couple decades and worked with various organizations. But they picked up when they saw me teaching online, they reached out and asked if I would do an online presentation. And when they first told me that they were going to open it up to their whole membership, actually, I need to back up. They offered me a choice. They asked me if I wanted to limit the number of participants or should we keep it open. And I said let them all in because I really feel strongly that as Alexander teachers, we haven't done enough to let the world know about our work. And so I saw this as an opportunity to share the work more widely. So it meant that I couldn't work the same way that I do in a smaller group, mostly in
Mm-hmm.
how I interacted with the participants. But
Mm-hmm.
in that moment, I thought it was more important to prioritize this platform to share our work widely. So I went for that.
Mm-hmm. Just to briefly get back to the smaller groups, do you have any words of advice for an Alexander teacher who has never done online work, certainly hasn't done any with people they've not met before, about how you would deal with a group of 5 or 10 or 15 people? Do you have any suggestions?
Sure. Doing your best to get your situation set up. So that's lighting and sound as clearly as possible. My next suggestion is start every class by orienting people to how you want to run the class. So are you going to mute everyone? Are you going to ask them to unmute themselves? They might need a little instruction about how to do that or how to pin your video so they can see you. I use international hand language, my silly little way. So I ask for a lot of responsiveness when I'm teaching, even in that very large group. I ask for thumbs up for if you can hear me and understand me. Thumbs horizontal is almost, and thumbs down is I'm not getting what you're saying. And a wave is I need help. So that's a way right away when I start my class that I'm already exchanging with people, whether it's 2 people or whether it's 200 people, that I start to have some interaction. I guess my next suggestion is to really be creative with ways to be experiential in the teaching. No one wants to sit still and listen to you for an hour. And so my teaching style already was very well suited for that, in that I'm always wanting to craft an idea, a constructive thinking idea, and then get my students engaged in a process of experimentation. So I do a lot of, the hardest part is kind of adjusting the camera. So if I stand up and I ask my students to stand up, then I have to make sure you can still see me, right? And to ask my students to do that as well, so that we might stand up or we might move in our chairs. So I really think ahead about ways I can engage my students so that the learning is experiential. They're not just sitting and listening or watching. I think those are my biggest tips.
So in the smaller groups, do you sometimes work individually with a person and other people are observing and giving their feedback the way those of us who trained with Marge Barstow back in the day might do for an in-person group session? You do that sort of thing, right?
Very much so. And not every class, but if I do give an individual lesson, I make sure to always loop back and not only ask other people what they saw and give feedback to the person having the lesson, but I'll extrapolate and experiment from what I'm working on in that lesson for us all to do together.
Right.
About it. In Alexander Principles, it's the part and the whole, yes? So I'm working with an individual and then constantly referencing back to the whole process of learning and experimentation for the whole group. Yeah.
Right. So a kind of like you might run an in-person group class, but with the limitations of it being online, right?
Well, there's a couple of actually added bonuses to being online.
Well, there are, yeah. We didn't get to those. Yeah, go ahead.
One thing is if I'm, so yesterday with my actors, my class for actors, I worked with an individual and I encouraged everyone to go pin their video, right? So that we were all using the same view. And then I asked the actor to pick one of us to play the scene to, right? And then we didn't know who that was, but we used the interaction with the screen as for an actor to engage with another player, if you will, another actor. And then the other thing that I'm loving about teaching online is I've been recording the classes and the lessons. And a practice that I started doing in my private practice quite a while ago was encouraging my students to take notes at the end of a lesson. And then I started using videos at the end of lessons, like little recaps, because I realized the way my students would interpret the lesson would often kind of slide back into habit. They would put the language back in their habituated language, and they would often miss key points that I thought were the most salient points of a lesson.
Right.
So when I started doing video recaps, I got to kind of control a little bit what I wanted them to take away.
Right.
Because I'm a control freak, or maybe that's because I really understand the process of changing habits. So when I record a lesson, then my students are getting this added value. You know, so much of the time we're seeing online learning as being less than because I can't touch you.
Hmm.
But that added value of that video that they can refer back to, my students are really enjoying a lot.
I would agree totally, even for just one-on-one lessons, which is what I primarily do. The video is often more important than the actual session because people can see themselves from angles they're not used to. They get a recap of the verbal material. So yeah, and the other thing that I don't know whether you found this, but one nice thing about online teaching is that it's absolutely clear to everybody that this is a lesson and you're not going to get a fix from a teacher by
Yes.
saying, "Oh, I'm going to go to a lesson and get fixed up because my back's hurting again." This is clear that the responsibility is on the student to learn and it's on the teacher to teach. It's kind of clear for both of us.
I
So
could not agree more that
yeah,
what we lose in being able to use our hands to translate information, uh, it puts the onus on our students that this is about constructive thinking. You have to use
exactly.
that tool. And I'm also training teachers
Mhm.
through Martha's Philadelphia School for the Alexander Technique. And what I'm doing is I'm meeting with the trainees before I teach a class. I'm asking them to observe certain things. And then at the end of the class, we really go through all the steps. We kind of dissect and deconstruct the teaching tools. And they are honing their observational skills because, again, part within the whole. Let's say right now I can only see your head, neck, and shoulders, right? Maybe down to your sternum. But I need to know what you're doing with your feet and your seat. And so I have to look for the organization of the whole. So it's going to up our game, I think.
Yeah.
I really think we can use this to an advantage. And,
Oh
you know,
yeah. Yeah.
we're going to be here for a while. Um,
Yeah. For
we're,
sure. Yeah.
we just
Yeah.
need to come to terms with the fact that it's not going to be safe to go back to things as they were for quite a while. And we might as well use our constructive thinking and help people because they need it more than ever. They need us more than ever. So I'm happily meeting the challenge and figuring it out as best I can.
Right. And my personal take is that in general, maybe not for everybody, online lessons are a faster way to learn the technique than in person, which is kind of paradoxical because there's no hands, obviously, but that just seems to be the case for the kind of reasons you mentioned, perhaps. Who knows? But so let's get on to yeah, you wanted to add something to that? Yeah.
Excuse me. The pollen count here is ridiculous. Please forgive
Oh,
me.
yeah.
Um, the other thing that I'm so excited about teaching online is that it really reduces the friction to let people in the door. And I mean that in two ways. Location, I
Hmm.
can now reach students around the world,
Hmm.
and price, because let's be honest, that Alexander technique has been a technique for the privileged and elite, right? Because it costs money. And
Right.
I'm teaching all of my classes pay what you wish because I really empathize with people whose income was impacted by the pandemic. And I wanted to make sure people could access classes. And so for me, if I'm already teaching that class and I'm already online, it's an easier way for me to have a sliding scale than if I'm doing in-person private lessons. So
Hmm.
I encourage all of us to think about this time to open our doors virtually and reach a
Hmm.
wider audience and reduce that friction because the whole world needs what we do and now we can reach them. So,
Yeah, I mean, most of my students are nowhere near me. They're nowhere, a lot of them are not in America for that matter. And a lot of them are in places where they would never, ever encounter an Alexander teacher in person. So, so let's move on to the very, very large group experience that you've had. I watched that with great interest, the first one and the subsequent ones, because I was curious to know how you were going to pull it off. And what I saw as, from my point of view, what I observed was that it really helped to have a moderator who was not you, right?
hmm
Someone who could field questions and clarify things with you, so that you wouldn't have to be constantly looking at the chat box and say, that's a lot when you have that many people. You really, it seems like it's good to have, if someone were contemplating doing that, there wasn't already somebody there who was going to do that, which was the case for
yeah,
your class, that you might want to get another teacher to be like an assistant to you, or switch off between the two of you. Have two people run a really large class, and the one who wasn't actively teaching was kind of collecting responses and helping to clarify stuff. What are some other things that you learned from that experience that would be worth sharing with teachers who might get that very kind of invitation? We got 500 people who are interested. What do you, can you, would you be willing to teach that class? And how would what do you need to kind of keep in mind to teach such a large group? Because you cannot watch all these people, right? You don't get that visual feedback that you would in a small class. So what advice would you give to teachers who either want to do that or just get an opportunity to do that and want to make the best of it?
well, I actually was watching. I couldn't watch all 100 or 200 people at a time, but I
Right,
did have it on gallery view. So I actually
right.
watching um, to some extent.
Uh-huh.
So I want to just say that the moderator and I would talk after every class. And
Mhm.
some weeks we got our rhythm better than others. And so that was an evolving process. Like
Mhm.
one week I kept getting interrupted by the moderator because I didn't check in enough with her. So
Mhm.
she and I really kind of collaborated and worked on how to do that effectively. But
Mhm.
that is a key thing. I used a PowerPoint presentation.
Mhm. Yep.
I do that as, frankly, it's a way to keep me on track. So when I created the ARC, they gave me a 6 week course, is what they hired me for. And then I really wanted to think through Mr. Alexander's story and the principles and how I was going to lay them out. And also, I was thinking very specifically about that audience, which was seniors. And I've taught seniors quite a bit, so I kind of know what's of interest to seniors. I know what some of the issues are. If
Mhm.
you're teaching an audience you don't know a lot about, communicate as much as you can with the people hosting the course and find out what they think the common issues are going to be. The more prepared you are, the better you're going to be able to build the arc of that 6 week course or 1 2 hour course, whatever it is. Then I use a PowerPoint. I have found this very helpful in large introductory workshops. It's my little running sense of how I want to build the day without constantly taking my attention away to a piece of paper for an
Mhm.
outline. My outline is the PowerPoint presentation. And
Mhm.
we live in a very visually driven culture. So again, I don't want them just looking at me for an hour. If I'm putting these images up, first of all, people are kind of used to that and like it.
Mhm.
So it breaks things up, the rhythm of the presentation, it breaks up visually what's going on, and it gives them kind of things they can take notes about and remember. Again, I'm crafting what the take home ideas are. So I'm
Mhm.
using that PowerPoint as my outline. And then I'm also interspersing those experiments. You can ask people to stand up and try things with you. And as long as I'm directing the thinking, I'm not just teaching a form, I'm teaching means whereby, and it can be done, and it's super helpful to make it experiential and much more concrete what we're getting after.
Right. I mean, you engage this large group quite
Yes,
actively. And I noticed the other thing I noticed is that you would quite often solicit feedback
yes,
from the group, like give me a thumbs up if you
yes,
understand what I just went over, or give me a thumbs up if in this little experiment we just ran together, you did notice greater ease when you
yes.
changed your thinking in some way. I
So,
thought that and the share screen function of Zoom. Um, you use those functions that are available on Zoom, and I assume on some other platforms. I'm not familiar with others, but those are really good things to understand and know about. And I don't think you did this at all, but the idea of having breakout rooms where a group of people can get together and talk about what they've noticed could be a good strategy too. So that would suggest that if you're going to be doing those kind of larger groups, you might want to really become familiar with Zoom or whatever platform you're using, because it does have some built-in abilities that were not necessarily designed for Alexander classes, but are certainly very useful for Alexander classes.
absolutely. And I think
Yeah.
if my class had been longer than an hour, I would have experimented with breakout rooms. I just
Mhm.
chose that in an hour, it was
Yeah.
plenty. But you're right. Again, when I started class, I always oriented people to how to use Zoom, and I always pointed out that reactions bar.
Hmm.
And we would
Hmm.
practice before we started. And then,
Right.
right, because then people aren't just, I learned a lot, Robert. I taught college freshmen
Hmm.
for about 6 or 7 years at a university here in Philadelphia. And it was the first time that I was teaching. It was a required course, so they didn't all choose to be there. And it was at 8:30 in the morning for 18-year-olds who had just
Not good.
the first. You let your imagination run wild for a moment. It was the most shut down group of students I have ever taught in my entire life. They
Yeah.
would sit there like lumps on a log. And
Yeah.
so a lot of my teaching skills got honed in how to engage these young, tired, probably hungover students who didn't really want to be there. And so this constant engaging their thinking and getting them to experiment, and then, well, how did that go? And I just want to point out one of my primary rules about that. Notice I had a I don't know option
Hmm.
because I always want to celebrate I don't know.
Hmm.
There's so much pressure when we ask for a reaction. Oh, did I not get it right? It's like, no, no, I don't know is great. The rule is repeat the experiment.
Yeah.
I often will say, thank you for your honesty. Yeah, that's great. Let's do it again. I bet you're not the only one. So I want to support right from FM's own story. What did he observe when he sat in front of those mirrors?
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing at first. So,
Yeah.
how do I highlight perseverance? How do I highlight repeating the experiment and cultivating our sensory mechanism? So, I'm
Yeah.
doing that right in the fabric of the class.
Yeah, yeah, I noticed that. I mean, that's something that I do a lot also. I really frame things as experiments, and there's no right or wrong outcome. And that's because people get really upset if they think they didn't do something right, and it gets into a hole. And you handled that very well. And I think that's a great tip for anyone working online or in person, for that matter, to make it really clear to a student that they really cannot make a mistake. This isn't about the possibility of failure because you didn't get it. You didn't get it, well, we got to do some more experimenting, right? So
Yes.
is there anything else you'd like to say to teachers out there who are contemplating either small groups or large groups, or maybe even trying to decide whether to even break into teaching individuals? Any advice that you have for people, teachers?
I mostly want to encourage you to do it and to try
Yeah,
it.
just do it.
Else that we're going to get better at it the more we do it, but that if you really understand it's a service to your students and to the world, that it's
Yeah.
an act of generosity to reach out and to connect to people, and that it will stretch us, it will stretch our abilities to observe and to be clearer and more articulate in our communication. And these are good challenges. So I encourage everyone, and I'm going to invite everyone, please come to my online classes. Come as my guest. I have several Alexander teachers that are coming to my classes, and I welcome you all. And, come as my guest. I would love to have you there, and I'm happy to answer questions. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I
Big
think
tip.
you're, yeah, what's
Be
that?
friendly. Be excited about the work
Yeah,
that.
no, it's an amazing, to me, it's like, I prefer this to in-person teaching, to be honest. Um, but one thing, well, I just had a thought and it disappeared. I can't remember now. But yeah, oh, Facebook. You're on some of the Facebook groups, right? The discussion groups. They are full of examples of people who have said, I never thought I'd ever want to teach online, but now I can't teach in person. So, okay, I gave it a try. And people pretty universally are amazed at what they can accomplish.
Yes.
It's just like a recurring theme on some of the Facebook groups. And so I would add, just reiterate what you said. If you're a teacher out there and you're not teaching because there's no in-person teaching available, explore online teaching. You might be very seriously shocked by how effective it can be. And as
Yeah.
you said, your audience, instead of you're living in a big city, it might be a couple million potential students. Well, online, it's 7 or 8 billion potential students, and a lot of them speak English, and a lot of them have money, and well, So, anything else you want to add? Yeah,
I do have one more tip. So the other thing
yeah.
I've been doing for my online classes.
Hmm.
Um, so first of all, the Friends Life Care, the one with hundreds of seniors, they're
Hmm.
posting those videos. They're posted on YouTube. You can find them on
Hmm.
my YouTube channel. But also, when I teach my online group classes, I simultaneously broadcast on Facebook. So
Oh,
again, I want to encourage my Alexander colleagues. This is an opportunity. The whole world is online right now. Even my
hmm.
senior citizen students in their 80s and 90s are on Zoom. This is our opportunity. It's like raising the Alexander Technique flag for proud. Let's be proud and share our work out into the world. Let's stop being the best kept secret. Like, let's use this platform to let people know
Hmm.
what we do. So I just want to encourage that because I know,
Hey,
Robert, again, thank you to you. You've been a pioneer. I am so grateful for all that you've done to raise that flag and encourage us all to get websites up when no one had websites up. I see you as a leader, so thank you.
oh,
Um,
well, thank you. And uh, I just, like I say, I agree totally. I think the future of Alexander teaching is online. And I'm sure there'll be platforms that are better than Zoom that'll have even more bells and whistles and stuff. But Zoom's pretty good. And I imagine some other ones are too. And it's free for one-on-one. If you want to do groups, you have to get a little fancier version of it, but it's not that expensive. So Ariel, thank you so much for being here. and take care.
Same,
Bye-bye.
Robert. Thank you so much.